topics, any miscellaneous topics you may have, from what to do when you first get the OC1 and so forth. Just by way of housekeeping, we're recording the session, so if you remain on the session and you make a contribution and you appear on the recording, by remaining on the session, you consent to being posted on YouTube on the CORA YouTube page. And any questions? Well, we don't have very many people today, so it might be more manageable for people to ask their questions in person, verbally. But you know, you can either raise your hand or submit your questions in the comments. And we've got a slide deck that Eric and Leanne will be going through. We've got our regular CORA directors as hosts, myself, Ron Chin from Falls Creek, CORA president, Leanne Stanley from Kelowna Paddle Center, Eric Ages from Fairway Gorge Paddling Center, and Val Simmons from Haunani in Montreal. So over to you, Eric.
All right, thanks everyone. I think Leanne and I have sort of thrown together a couple of slides just to sort of inform the first part of the discussion. So we'll go through that just one slide at a time. And then if you have questions frantically, you can wave your hand, but if not, we'll deal with most of the questions after. And if it turns into a general discussion about different topics, so be it. Val and Ron and Leanne and I are all prepared to sort of go with the flow. So what I'll do first is just launch this slide deck. Let me just see here. Share screen. I'm going to start here. Share. All right, there we go. Leanne, I guess if you can admit people, if there's any latecomers, that'd be great. Can everyone
if you make me co-host, I can do that.
Sure. Oh, okay. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
All right, great. All right. So all things great and small, OC1. So we're going to deal with topics, rigging, launching, fit and feel. Fit and feel is where Leanne's going to jump in a fair amount. Transporting your boat, storage, and when in doubt. So a lot of the sort of the nuts and bolts of this is going to be literally saving you from nuts and bolts. There's lots of things that can happen with OC1s that are very expensive. They're preventable mistakes, and you don't really know that you've made a mistake until it's too late in terms of rigging and all this kind of stuff, transporting. So if we can save you a few $100 or worse, a few $1,000, then consider this time well spent. All right, so let's go. We'll start with rigging your boat. So you've got your boat, it's fresh out of the container, or you've just bought it secondhand from somebody. You need to rig it somewhere. You're either rigging it at a club, or you're rigging it for a downwind. You're taking it off a boat or off a truck or a vehicle, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Always know when you're on the water, you've all practiced 360-degree awareness. You need to use that same awareness when you're rigging your boat. So are you rigging on a beach or on a shoreside somewhere, or are you rigging on a dock? Those things can really affect, for example, over the years, countless iakus have fallen off the edge of the dock, at least at my club. Because of the way they fall in the water, chances are you'll never get them back, because they don't just fall straight. An iaku zigzags and jackknifes, and so where it lands on the seabed, you'll never know. So protect all of the bits and pieces that you're using to rig your boat. On a beach, find out where, like, don't rig too close together if it's windy or anything, or if you've got a whole bunch of kids or people playing around. Like, just be very aware of your circumstances so that your boat gets into the water with all the pieces that you need, or if on the dock, it gets into the water with all the pieces you need. Be very aware of wind. Be very aware of wind direction. And your boat is safest when it's fully rigged, because it has more points of contact either on the dock or on the beach. When you're dealing with pieces, you're at the highest risk. Boats can behave like tumbleweed, and all of a sudden you've turned your head, you turn around, and your boat has like literally tumbled 20 feet down the beach. And if the beach is not just sand, you could be in trouble. So be aware of all the pieces, and really sort of be very careful not to lose any bits. Oh, I've gone too far. In terms of where you're rigging, this is a dock rig. I mentioned wind in the slide before. If you see those are just plain rowing stretchers, and those are at my club. You can see the concrete blocks underneath them. They are bungeed tight like a drum to those concrete blocks so that they don't blow over. Like, that's how mindful you have to be of the wind all the time. On a beach, you know, you may be wanting to rig your boat against with a log to protect your rudder. There's all kinds of things. Leanne, how do you rig in your? You have one stretcher, right, that you use for your rudders?
So in Kelowna, we don't have docks, so we're rigging on grassy areas or beachy areas type of thing. So depending on who you are and where you are, we do have some of these little carrier things, or some of us just rig with our rudder hanging off, because at Kelowna Paddle Center we have a little bit of dip, so we have our rudder hanging off into the air as we rig, or we just actually put our rudder down on the soft grass is another way that we do it too, depending on the type of rudder that you're using and how fragile it is.
Right.
Ron,
Ron, you have one stretcher, right?
Yeah, at Falls Creek, we have these wooden X-shaped stretchers that we prop up the rudder on. And if you're taking your boat to a race, transporting your boat to a race, I've seen people use small folding camp stools with just a canvas sling on them. And you can just buy that at any sort of camping store. Or you can even get a small little tripod one, probably at the Dollarama. I think I got one at. And you can use one of those. And those are pretty inexpensive ways of propping up your rudder if you're transporting your boat to a race site.
So, yeah, you can also build them out of plumbing pipe too. Like, that plumbing pipe is, you can just use that quick seal and make your own little V-shaped contraption.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen people use life jackets, the boat cover, towels rolled up and stacked, suitcases, things to lift that rudder up. So Eric, if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about why, depending on your rudder. So here's 3 different boats with 3 different rudders. On the Aukai at the back, we've got the weed rudder. So the biggest thing is the smaller the rudder, the less pressure it's going to put on it, kind of thing, because it's holding less weight of the boat. So you can see the Valeria in the middle. There's a whole lot of boat in the air that rudder, that 9-inch surfing rudder, is holding up. So ideally, I wouldn't want this rudder on the grass if I had any concerns whatsoever of kids or dogs or anything coming by that might put weight down on that canoe, or if the ground was not squishy and soft that it was sitting on. Whereas this grass is pretty squishy and soft. It's irrigated regularly here in Kelowna versus other places where we launch from. And I know that there's no rocks around it because we've looked at the spot. Whereas the Kai here has the standard rudder on it. Again, we've looked around, we've made sure that the area that we've put it on has not gotten anything on it. Again, the newer your boat, the less likely I would do it this way. Just because, you know, that first scratch always hurts the worst. And also, if you're just learning how to lift and carry your canoe, to do it this way, where you're putting it down flat on the grass instead of on a cradle, you have to be very, very gentle. So you have to be completely in control of the boat when you're doing it this way. So unless you have a lot of experience carrying your boat, lifting it off the ground, putting it on the ground, I would not recommend putting it directly on the ground like this.
We're gonna show a few videos of lifting a boat up out of stretchers and putting a boat in the water the proper way. Now, there is no, I mean, I guess the proper way is the way we learned, but the principles are the same on grass, on beach, on a dock, whatever. The basic mechanics of lifting a boat up is the same, but as Leanne will say further on, if in doubt, if you don't know something, ask the right person. But if you're not confident about it, lifting a boat or rigging it this way or putting it on the grass or the beach, get help. Ask for a second person. Don't feel like you have to do it on your own. It's a $7,500, $8,000 boat. You don't want to, it's not something to play with. But yeah, this is a good example. This is basically how you'd rig it on a beach as well. Now, tradition would have you point the nose of all these boats toward the water. And it's just a tradition, but those traditions are important because it's what you expect and it's consistent, and therefore there are no surprises. So if this were the water in front of the noses of these boats, that's where the bows would be pointing.
That's where they're pointing.
Yeah. So Leanne mentioned lifting a boat. Again, you want 360-degree awareness. So always be careful. If there's a whole bunch of families picnicking or doing anything like that, accidents can happen. So always be aware. Don't turn your back on your boat. It can blow away. The boat is safest when it's fully rigged because there's more points of contact. If you're de-rigging your boat, always deal with the biggest pieces first. I've noticed at my club, people de-rig the boat and then they put the Iakus and Amas away. And meanwhile, your big hull is exposed to the wind. And that's the one that's most liable to blow away. So deal with the big chunks first and then deal with the smaller pieces. That's my advice anyway.
On that note, Eric, what I often do is that I'll put the Iakus on top of the Ama. Sure, and my life jacket on top of that almond, just to give it a little extra weight, because it is light. It will blow around if there is wind. So just having the pieces that you have with you, putting it on top so that I can get my hull dealt with, to get it on top of the car, for me on top of the car, for others on top into their club rack, wherever. But yeah, as far as seeing boats fly, this goes for marathon canoes, this goes for surf skis, this goes for all our canoes. All it takes is a little bit of that wind to get underneath it, and it can actually lift the whole boat. But also what we'll often see is that wind from the side will start to spin it or start to roll it. And so I've seen this in Hawaii, I've seen this in Canada, I've seen this at different sports, is that those boats start to fly. And once they get moving, they are hard to track down. And it's very hard to watch a boat fly. Like, it is painful because you know the damage that is likely to happen. It just, and it feels like it's in slow motion, but you still can't catch up to it.
No,
Can you tell I'm speaking from experience here?
That's definitely a good lesson. I've watched it countless times too, including my own boats. So it is painful to watch. So never turn your back on your boat. If anything, like, even get somebody to babysit it. If you're putting stuff away, get someone to look after, like, put their hands on, one hand for the boat, keep your hands or somebody else's hands on the bits and pieces, or figure it out somehow, but don't ignore it.
And I've asked random strangers if they could just stand over my boat or stand over the Ama, just with a foot on either side, just so that if it did get blown, it would just twist within their feet. And usually people are so intrigued by what we're actually doing that they have no problems. You'll just, take a few more minutes to, or for me, half an hour to explain what we're doing, and have some fun with them, invite them to try it, and get them to sign up for a membership. But lots of people are willing to help.
Yes, they are. Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask. Okay. So let's take a quick look at how you lift and carry a boat. So here's a quick video. Back Iaku like that. Rudder in front of you. Seat on your shoulder. These Hurricanes are the hardest to carry, by the way. Most of the other newest boats are much easier to carry. This is a hard boat to carry because of the position of the Iakus to the seat. But that's the correct form. Rudder in front of you so you can always see what you're doing. Then the bow goes in the water or on the beach or the sand first, and then the rudder goes in last. There you go. Any questions about that? Leanne, do you want to comment on that? That's the classic way of carrying a boat.
Yeah, one of the great things that's demonstrated in this video, and it's too bad we can't go slow-mo here as he's picking it up, but if we play it again, so stop it there. So often when we're teaching this to people, we're talking about, stand facing the rudder.
Mhm.
And so, because often they'll forget which way arm they're supposed to reach across with,
Right.
kind of thing. So if you're standing facing the rudder and looking at the AMA, then it's an easier way to do it. But with those 2 points of contact where you've got his hand on the front Iako and then the hand on the side of the boat, he can lower this down below his shoulder so that you can see all around you. Often people, if they have the AMA hanging down, you can only see what is on that one side of you. You can't see anything else. So especially like when you're launching from the Broad compound in Vancouver, when you're walking through a parking lot, when you have to cross the street in some cases, those kind of things, you need, like Eric said, you have to have that 360 awareness to know what's around you. So then you need to be able to lower that boat so you can see. Because believe it or not, people aren't actually going to get out of your way.
Yeah, they are.
Especially
Yeah.
if you've got cyclists coming by kind of thing, they expect that you see them. And they're not
And
going to
also
stop.
passersby and other people have, they don't understand the boat. They have no idea how big it is or how long it is. They just misgauge it all the time. So you have to give them a much wider berth than you would normally think.
Absolutely. And with the 2 hands of contact here, if a wind started coming from the side, all he needs to do is kind of separate his legs and just brace for the wind kind of thing. And then ideally turn it into the wind.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to fight it. And then so another way, like right now he's facing his rudder, he could also spin that boat so it's basically in front of his chest with his hands the way they are too, if the wind was coming from that left side. So you could still, again, carry it so that it's not going to be a sail to the wind, but you can point the end of the boat straight into the wind. So it's a lot easier to carry. So you can carry it on so many different angles to make it easier for you with this technique. Plus the boat is designed for the bulk of the weight to be on that seat. So with that seat sitting on your shoulder versus part of the hull's not designed to carry small points of force, whereas that seat is made to distribute that force in that area on the boat. So it's reinforced. So that's why we want to have the bulk of the weight of the canoe sitting on that seat on your shoulder.
I just want to, Leanne and the rest of us are all like, standard sized people, but this method this is Tristan, one of our staff carrying the boat. He's 6'1" or something like that. But we have staff who are 5 feet tall who carry the boat like this as well. They're more than capable of doing this. You rest the seat of the boat on your shoulder, and as Leanne said, you're very nimble. You can direct the boat into the wind to keep it safe so that it doesn't blow away from you or it doesn't blow you away. So you're always calibrating where that boat is pointing into the wind. So this is now again, I want to go back to an earlier point. If you're not confident carrying the boat this way, get a second person to help you. And people are more than happy to help. But if you're not, like, practice this. But if you're still feeling fidgety or nervous, then get a second person to help for sure. So bow first. Go ahead. Sorry.
One of the advantages of this way too is that the AMA is well above the ground too, because like you said, if you're a shorter person and the AMA is hanging down while you're carrying it, that AMA could hit a curb or something that you're stepping over while you're getting to the beach or the boat ramp, that sort of thing.
All right. So how do I get to the next video here? Sorry. Oops. Oh, here we go. All right, so here's the next one. This is where the same person is lifting the boat out of the water. So we'll just do this.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, and there's one of those hazards on the dock.
Yeah. So again, I just want to point out, he lifted it from the back Iaku always. Rudder's in front of him where he has the most control. And then he's going to put it on the stretchers the same way he put it on the water. Bow first. And then he's going to use that back Iaku for leverage and gently put the AMA back on the ground. So any comments from you guys? It's just the reverse. It's the same in reverse.
Yeah. So if you're like, again, so we don't have docks here in Kelowna. We're standing in the water doing this, which I find a lot easier because the boat is already halfway up your body when you're picking it up. Especially if you're a tall person, it's a lot easier. You don't have to reach down quite as far. But when he's putting it back on the stretchers, or if you're putting it down onto the grass, again, it's making sure that you check that ground, that there's no hazards where you're going to place that nose first, and that you're doing it as gently as possible, because even the tiniest rock can cause an issue. So it's like, again, picking your spots strategically of where you launch from and put back from, and putting it down as gently as possible.
All right. I think people can ask questions about that a little bit later, but we're going to go on to the more nuanced area of this boat stuff, which is fit and feel. So, you know, a lot of it is a matter of personal preference, but there are some basic, you know, standard rules. So I'm going to pass this over to Leanne to talk a little bit about how you want to sit in the canoe, bearing in mind that everyone's different. So Leanne, over to you.
Yeah, if you want to take it to the next slide, just so that we can use him as just a visual. Beautiful,
Okay.
perfect. That's
All right.
good. Alrighty, so the first thing that I like to talk about when we talk about the boat is how close, how close our feet are to our bum, kind of thing. And again, the different boats will, because the foot wells have a different angle depending on the boat, the seat heights relative to the bottom of your heels are going to be different in some of the different boats. So there is some flexibility here, but like my personal opinion on this is that you want your knees a little bit higher than the hips, but not as high as we see on the screen.
Right.
Some boats you're limited. So if you're a tall guy like the 6'1" and you have super long legs, some seats don't go back far enough. And they'll talk about how we can modify seats here in a minute. But ideally, I like to see the knees just a little bit higher than the hips. And again, so much of this is going to be personal comfort. But the reason why we want to have some of that knee bend is so that we can get that cycling action out of the hips. If your legs are just straight out in front of you, you can't press off those heels to get leg drive. So we need to have that. But if those knees are too high up, then you start losing mobility in them. But you've got to find that balance between, you know, hamstring flexibility, low back flexibility, comfort, and being able to generate power. So with these seats, for some tall folks, I had a gentleman that was 6'4" come, I thought it was to demo a Volare versus a Kai the other day. And all he needed to do was sit in the boat because he needed to see if he fit. Which ones could he get a seat back far enough? Or if the Volare move the foot brace far enough forward and separate the seat that he could sit in. But we're still going to have to shave off part of the back of the seat to get it back just another ½ inch further and give him some play back there in the Volare that he's going to get within the next, hopefully, month and a half. So we can modify these seats. So if you have your own boat, with club boats, you don't have a whole lot of a choice, but you could get your own custom seat made. And
Yes.
if those seats are not, if they're Velcro down, you could just bring your own seat with you. So some reasons you might want to modify your seat are that a lot of club seats, or if your boat has been well loved over the years, second hand, third hand, fourth hand, the foam will squish. So depending on who had that boat before you, if they were quite left leaning, that left side of the seat might be a lot more compressed than the right side of the seat. So you might want to get a new seat so that, you know, you can start off on that level playing field as it starts with. Another reason you might want to get your own seat or customize the seat that came with your boat is depending on, how do I say this with tact, your bum shape. So there's some people that have very bony bottoms, and sometimes the foam just isn't soft enough for you. And so some people like to carve out a little bit of space for the ischial tuberosities. Those are basically your bum bones, to give them a little bit of space. I often find that with men, or they'll build up their seat so there's another piece of foam on top with 2 little circles. Surf ski paddlers often do this as well. They'll put a pad in their cockpit to give that a little bit of room for those ischial tuberosities. I have a lot of padding of my own on my bum, so I don't need this, but people that may not have that kind of padding on their own body may feel more comfortable with that, and that might help with some of the tingling in the legs that can happen with that. Another thing with the seats And I find this especially with men generally because they tend to have less hamstring flexibility than most women. But also because some of the seats have been so worn down, or just with your anatomy, to lift the back of the seat up just a little bit so that it's not forcing you into like this rounded, hunched over position. So it's easier to sit up tall. It's easier to get that straight back. Because as soon as we round, we lose power. We want to sit up tall because we want our shoulders a little bit ahead of our hips. So if we can build up the back of our seat a little bit to give us a little bit of that forward lean, it makes it a lot easier to get forward on top of the blade, because your body already wants to fall that way. You're not fighting it. So I often say to people, bring a tea towel with you, or something that you can roll up to put under the back of your seat just to lift it a little bit, or some old padding or some old foam. I often use the blue camping foam from like Canadian Tower, the sleeping mats. I tend to cut up that stuff for everything. So I'll often kind of slide that underneath if I'm working with new people to lift the back of that seat just to see how it feels. And then I've had some people build up the back of their seats to the comfort they like. So that's the seating side of things. And then we've got, again, the rigging side. And this is a big thing for a lot of new paddlers is, how do I rig my boat? There's so many options. There's Yakko into the boat where you might have a couple different settings. Hurricanes, you've got a bunch of settings. And then into the AMA, you have a couple settings. Into the back of the AMA, you may have pins, you may have a slide, where again, you have more options. It's like, what is the right one for you? And what is the right one for the water conditions you're in? What is the right one with your experience? So all these things are going to come into play with how you decide your rigging. What I like to do when I get paddlers first out on a boat that they're not familiar with, whether that's their own boat or a club boat, is I actually carry a level in my car. And of course it's a Stanley level, Stanley Tools, last name Stanley, just, for fun. So I take out the Stanley tool level and we put it on I keep pointing at my screen and you guys can't see what I'm pointing at, but it's funny to me. I put it kind of just above the ankles, on basically the footwell, the gunnels of the footwell. And then we can try and get them to sit up straight, because generally a lot of people, as soon as they get in the boat, they'll start to lean left. And it's like, no, talking about sitting up straight, weight equal on both bum cheeks, and then seeing kind of where's that boat. And then I get them to shift that weight a little bit and see what it does with the little bubble in the level. But often when I put it on, it is so far up on the right side, that little bubble, that shifting doesn't do a thing, kind of thing. And that's a big eye opener for a lot of paddlers. And I've done this with experienced paddlers too. And they're like, oh. And then so I stand there and they're sitting on the water and I start lifting the back Yakko out of their AMA, again, asking them to sit as tall until they tell me that bubble's in the middle. And then lock off the back Yakko and then see what that shifting the weight, right cheek, left cheek, starts to do to that bubble, and starting them getting kind of used to feeling what that feels like. And I know here in a second in the video, he's going to show us kind of how to find that spot on the right side where it starts to break that surface tension of the AMA, of where I call it, we don't have the beep here to censor, but the oh crap point. And usually I would use the other word for that starts with S, where it's like, how far right can I lean before there's no way I can save it? It's done, you're over, kind of thing. But I like to play with that level so that they can see just how much that shifting right cheek, left cheek does to the weight in the boat. Because if I'm really left cheeking it every time I'm on that left side, there's so much more pressure on the AMA and so much more wetted surface, which means more drag, kind of thing. And then if I'm paddling on the right side and I'm paddling like this, where I'm leaning over to the left, well, there's a whole lot of drag on there. If you can get your body sitting upright and centered, or even just a little bit more right cheeked while paddling on both sides, that lightens that AMA. So there's not as much drag. You're actually going to go faster. And it's one of the things I love about coaching is that people that have the GPSs in front of them are like, oh, I go faster on my right side. Yep. And why do you think that is? And then it takes them time to make that connection that they're faster because there's less weight on the AMA. But it takes them time to come to that connection, where for some of us, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And like logically they know that, but it didn't internalize, it didn't register and go, oh yeah, So a level is quite an affordable tool. And you don't need a big one, you don't need a fancy one. But it can really give you some good awareness of your boat and where you are with it. Eric, remind me, what else was I going to talk about?
Let's just play this video, because what it does is demonstrate the kind of middle zone that you kind of want to achieve if you've actually rigged your boat to the point where it's actually level rather than canted left. So here, we'll just quickly play this.
Hey guys, Marcus here. Today's topic is going to be on boat balance and pricing. So before you get off the water, the best thing to do to start working on your boat balance is to just kind of put your paddle on the dock, make sure you have two hands here, and start testing your boat balance. So what we want to find is the point when the AMA is going to leave the water and how much weight you can commit to that right now. So what I like doing here is, again, securing myself to the dock, starting to apply pressure with my right hip until the AMA breaks surface tension, and I put it right back down again. What we don't want to do is apply too much pressure so that we end up falling over into the dock. You want to apply just enough to break the surface tension of the AMA so that it will break the surface, lift, and then back down again. And just try to find that tipping point, that point when the AMA will leave the water before you go over all the way. Again, hands on the dock will help here. Make sure that you don't go all the way over. So after that, next thing we'll want to do is get on the water and try out some bracing.
All right, so let's, there we go. Leanne, do you want to go back to that? Or are you okay with that? Do you want to go on to transportation?
So one thing, so again, not all of us have docks, but hopefully most of us have friends.
Right.
You could ask a random stranger, but I'd like to rather trust a friend on this one. If you don't have a dock here, you can do this drill by having someone else stand in the water, and not in Vancouver apparently right now with the E. coli issues, but here in Kelowna, we've got beautiful, nice, clear water. And so I like to stand in the water with my arms above the AMA. So it's basically that safety zone for people to then play with that leaning over right, to feel what it feels like to break that surface tension of that AMA coming out of the water. Whereas the safety net is, if that AMA comes up, my arm's going to stop it before it hits the O-crap point and they go swimming, kind of thing. And then getting them, and that's another way where I work on that brace stroke that we talked about back in our safety video, I think with Isaac and Miles a few weeks ago. So that's one way to work on it if you don't have a dock.
All right. So if people have questions about rigging and boat position, we can field those a little bit later. But let's move on. So now that you've got your boat, you've rigged it, you've put it in the water, you do at some point need to take it from A to B. I think Ron, Leanne, myself, I think many people on this call have had some rather awful things happen. And so if we can spare anybody some of that, and some of it's counterintuitive. Some of it has to do with tying boats down too tightly. So, because you're so afraid of having your boat come loose on the highway or the road that people can over tighten, and that can do just as much damage as having the boat actually leave the roof of your car for less happy places. So we're going to talk about how tight to tighten your boat down onto the rack, what kind of rack options there are for your boat, what to do with plugs, how to transport your, do you take your rudders and seats off, all of this kind of stuff. We're going to go through little bits and pieces of this one at a time. So let's start with how tight is too tight. Some people in their enthusiasm have bought tie downs for their vehicles with ratchets. So that is the first thing to avoid at all costs. So you want to be able to feel how much power you're applying to the straps that are holding your boats onto to to your vehicle. So, and I said to Leanne and Val a few days ago that I like to use like pinching your cheek on your face. You want it to be uncomfortable, but you don't want it to be so painful that you're yelping out. So you want to tighten the strap down on your vehicle to the point where you're just on the verge of discomfort with pinching your cheek, if that makes sense. I like that kind of proprioceptive version. If somebody else has a different technique, that's fine. You want it to be tight, but you don't want to be so nervous and frantic that you're cinching down. And I've had one experience where we had one person who was anxious that way, tightened so much that I could hear the cracking go down the hull of the boat. So that you can actually apply enough force to do that. So I use this as a kind of like easy measure. Anyone else have any suggestions about how tight is tight?
For visual, for those of us that are kind of more visual thing, if I cannot put the end of the strap, if I cannot place it between the boat and the actual strap, it's too tight. I need to be able to slide it through, one, to help tie it off. But if I can't tie that off, it's too tight. If it's easy to put it through, it's probably too loose, kind of thing. I should actually have to work to do it, but not work too hard. Because I like to wrap my straps around just to give that little lock. I don't like to trust the teeth, because some straps, they may have been living in your car or your basement for how many years, and the teeth part of it may not be as strong as it used to be. And so sometimes they loosen up over time. So if you're going down the road and that vibration loosens that teeth, next thing you know, your strap that was tight when you left the parking lot or you left your house is no longer so tight. So I like to lock off that strap so that it can't, if it did loosen up, it's not going to loosen enough on the boat that I won't realize I'll realize before it's too late, kind of thing. So that's how I gauge it.
So again, you want, as Leanne said, you don't want to trust those teeth, but you want to trust those teeth much more than ratchet straps. So please never ever use ratchet straps, because your chances of doing damage to your boat are so much greater. So maybe big boats, like big spec boats and so on, those are fine, and dragon boats and so on. But little boats like ours, our OC1s, it's just not designed for that. That's not the right use. I have some pictures of some straps in a few slides that we can show you. Okay. The other thing is, take your seats off. If you don't have your boat in a boat cover, take your seats off. The highways of Hawaii are littered with OC1 seats. And I'm sure the coast of California and the trip down to Columbia River Gorge, there must be countless OC1 seats off in the bush. Mm-hmm. So you want to take your seats off, put them in your vehicle, unless you've got a full boat cover, which is fine. And then do not, if you can take your plugs out if they come out. Like the newer plugs, they tend not to come out, but just take your plug out if it's just loose, but never, ever, ever tape that hole, the ventilation hole on your boat. If it's in the water, you can have a plug that doesn't aspirate or breathe very well, but when it's not in the water and exposed to heat, like heat today, your boat will crack like broken glass in this kind of heat. So you want to make sure that plug's either hanging so that there's the full ability to breathe. If it's a hurricane or some other with a less obvious breathing apparatus, so it's like hurricanes have a little tiny turn key thing, you want to undo that so that it can fully breathe when you're transporting. Anybody have comments about that?
Yeah, and that's not only heat, but elevation as well. So if you're driving over the Coquihalla, the air pressure is different. Like if you've ever gone to a ski resort with a bag of potato chips and all of a sudden up at the top of the mountain, it's a big pillow instead of, just a crinkly bag.
And so with our boats, those of us that have plugs with the straws in them, blow through your straw. Make sure that it isn't plugged with spiders or dirt or salt water or anything like that. Don't suck in, blow. Just in case there is some kind of creature in there. But just again, to make sure it's clear. And like, we just rigged up our Mirage here today, and it was just like, okay, like they've got everything locked down. I'm like, okay, in this heat, as soon as that sun comes around and it's no longer in the shade, like, so I had to check. I didn't even think about COVID or anything, sadly. I checked that hose, the little tube, to make sure that it would breathe, just because I know what the heat was going to get to today.
And I have actually witnessed a boat coming off the water where the water, you know, keeps the boat at a relatively cool temperature. The boat goes onto the top of the car. It's not able to breathe properly, and the whole boat cracks. You can hear it cracking again. And so that's a pretty substantial repair that you want to avoid. And repairs like that, where the boat cracks like broken glass, frankly, you're never sure whether you can trust the boat again when it's that substantial. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. Don't tape it. As Leanne said, make sure that it's able to breathe. If you can, remove the plug, or at least have the plug hanging there, but don't have it hanging riskily where you arrive at your destination and the plug's not there. So if in doubt, make sure that that plug's not just going to fall out. And the same is true for rudders. So if you're transporting, there are people who've arrived at the race site with no rudder anymore because the vibration from the drive has caused the rudder to work itself loose. So if in doubt, if you're really cautious, make sure your rudder's either tight or take the rudder out.
And
Okay,
if
we're
you've got
gonna
a boat
go
through
ahead.
ozone, they come with a little tube of stuff, and that stuff is called Loctite. It's like a glue. So if you've got an ozone boat recently or in the past and you still have your little baggie of stuff, you can put a little squirt on that on the outside of the screw and on the inside of the rudder and tighten it down, and that'll act like a little bit of glue as well. If you're concerned about it, that can help as well. But yeah, if in doubt, take it out. For
Yeah.
plugs, for rudders. When I've driven cross country with boats on my roof, I'll take the rudder out. Just one, because you'll be amazed at the number of people that walk with no awareness and run into the rudder, even though there's a car and then the flag at the end of the boat, they will walk into a rudder.
And that's a good segue to flags, actually. Whether your boat's in a bag or anything like that, the bylaw officers and police officers that follow the rules to the T could get you in trouble. You need to have a 1 foot square flag. So the little pennant that comes attached, technically, most officers won't bother you about it, but technically you want a 1 square foot flag. And Leanne has added deck hull down or up and the flag. So Leanne, I'll let you comment on that.
Well, as we get further along here, we're going to have some pictures of different racking systems and talk about different racking systems. So the rack is really going to determine whether we go deck down or hull down onto the rack.
Oh, here's a photograph of a plug. So this is the ozone sort of standard tube plug. And that's the kind of thing that you want to undo when you're in transport, or at least check to make sure that that little hose, actually, I would recommend if it's not in the water, take it out, because it really does need to breathe more than you would think. Here's some examples of some simple ratchet, not ratchet straps, but the physical tension straps. And again, my recommendation is to find straps that have a fabric protector between the actual buckle and the boat. Like these ones have fabric. Some of them come with rubber, and the rubber breaks off within a few tries. So try and get the kind that have fabric. And then we'll move over to here. Here's an example of a commercial rack. But I have this photograph here because instead of fancy rigging systems, this is plumbing insulation and then plumbing tape that goes over that plumbing insulation to protect it from the weather. That's all you need. And in fact, this very simple sort of covering, some people use pool noodles, that's fine, and then cover it in this kind of plumbing tape. It's actually the handiest, easiest thing to use of all in a lot of places. And this is an example where the hull would go up and the cockpit would go down against the actual rack itself. Here's an example, another hull down system. And we're showing here, these are hand tightened straps. And this is an example of a bow line as well. We'll talk about that in a moment. Here's some bow line rigging things that go underneath the hood of your vehicle in order to keep, this is the safest way to transport a boat, is to have a bow line, but there is a V-shaped rack system. I think that's here.
So
and
Eric,
Leanne,
if
you
you go
can
back
comment
and we
on this.
talk, if you go back a second and we talk about that bow line, because you've got that picture here. So the little strap with the handle that he had, you tuck it under the hood, and then so it's coming up there. So with a car like this, where the roof racks are very close together, ideally when we're carrying a boat, because those boats are, you know, anywhere around 20 feet small or longer, that's a lot of wind torsion that you can have it. So if your racks are close together and the straps are close together, that's a lot of pressure in a small area of your boat. If the wind's coming up, like the worst I hate is a wind coming one way and then you get the transport trucks and the wind from those coming another way kind of thing. And you get this twisting on your boat. And I just have this feeling about, you know, boats twisting and snapping off in there. And then you also get a lot of shift. So if you have a car where the racks are close together and you don't have a V rack that we're going to show here in a second, or an extension rack, a bow line is hot. Like, it's the best. I've never used one except for my marathon canoes, but I've always had longer racks to use. But they are so handy in terms of adding that extra little bit of stability to your canoe, especially when you're on the highway, especially if you're going to be traveling, you know, at the rate of traffic on our major highways where people are going 110, 120. This can give you a little bit more confidence in your tie down system by having a bow line on there.
Yeah, I think, Leanne, I just want to emphasize that with racks that are this close together, which are most vehicles do not have big wide racks. You do need a bow tie down for safe transport on the highway. It's the risk of something bad happening, including just flex and torsion itself. Even if you arrive with your boat still on the roof, why put your boat through that kind of unnecessary stress? So the bow tie down really does, and if you're really, really, you know, on top of it, you would use a tail tie down as well. But the bow tie down will at least prevent you from losing your boat entirely, which happened to a friend of mine who just bought a brand new boat. She used a rack system that attached to the rack aftermarket. So it attached to the roof aftermarket. She was on the highway and the entire rack blew off the car along with the boat and everything else. The bow tie down would have prevented that from happening because it would have reduced the pressure enough to protect the boat and the rack. So
Darius in the chat is asking what's close together, and I think you mentioned that. So most cars, I suppose the comparison is that your boat is 20 feet long, right? Yeah. And even if your racks are like 3 feet apart or something, 3 feet trying to support 20 feet, yeah, that's a huge difference, right? So,
and
that's not to say, go ahead.
Go ahead, Eric.
I'm just going to say that's not to say that you can't trust your roof rack. But but the way to trust it is with a bow tie down, because it adds that extra bit of leverage at the very front, that stability at the front, so that your racks that may be 3 feet together can now do their job properly. If you don't have a bow, if you're not secured to your bow, then those two racks, you're expecting too much from them. So it's not that you can't do it, it's just that you do need a bow tie down for that second point of stability.
Yeah. And Kelvin in the chat just suggested that most small size sedans or compact cars would be close together, and I would agree with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're just driving to and from your house, you're on streets, you're not on the highway, those kind of things, that's usually okay. It's when we start getting to highway driving that we want an extender. So I say close together as being like a meter apart, not 3 feet, like anything closer together than a meter. So this is wide. So this is probably about a good 1.5 meters on these ones. Yeah. So the wider you can have your racks apart. So when I go shopping for a vehicle, these are things I'm looking at. I'm looking for a flat roof line, one that doesn't, you know, angle up. So the front of the boat wouldn't be higher than the back of the boat, because I don't want that wind coming up under the boat. I look for the spacing on the racks, because there's some racks that, you know, are there more for fashion than attachments. Like even
Mhm.
if you look at the Kia Soul in the background of this picture, you can see, yeah, the rack goes all the way to the back, but it's actually not usable. You
Yeah.
can't, you
Yeah.
can't put a crossbar back there. And so that
Mhm.
shortens the span of the
Even
vehicle. But
this,
these are kind of
Leanne,
things.
even this car here in front of us, this is a very wide rack. Like it's very unusual to be able to spread your racks this
Yeah.
far. But even this one, I'm comfortable transporting my boat in town, as Leanne had mentioned, without a bow tie down. But if I were going down to Steveston or down the highway, I would still add a bow line to the a bow tie down to this vehicle, even with a rack this far apart. Now, what's different is this particular one. So I think who has one of these V-bars that can comment on it? Go ahead, Val.
Well, I'm not sure I can comment on it, but I have a V-bar and I've never tied my canoe down, and I've been to Toronto and back a few times and to Ottawa and back a few times. And I don't know, maybe I should be tying it down, but I'm using a V-bar.
So there's lots
Yeah.
of different versions of this on the market. Ultimately, the goal is to widen the force points apart kind of here. So with V-racks, you really want to make sure again that the foam is soft, so that you're distributing the force of the boat being held down onto that, instead of just tiny points. In these, the rounded part of the hull is going to be the strongest. And then, so there's also some of these that have the slings in the middle. Like mine's a U rack, so it's actually a U with a strap down here. So the hull actually sits in there and it's in contact with the strap all the way around. And it's just kind of free swinging in there. But with these V racks, if you are traveling, just down the street, the bungees that come with them, fine. As soon as you hit a highway, you want a safety strap on these. So you need to have a strap that goes around your boat and around the rack that's on the car, not just around the actual V rack. So if something happened with the attachment of the V rack to the car rack, there's going to be something there to hold it down. For some people, they actually like to go around the whole car and through the inside of the doors.
Oof.
So that because if that rack, those crossbars on that vehicle that we're looking at, if something happened to those crossbars, that then the boat's going to go off. If you have that tie down that either went under rails on the side of the vehicle or in through the car itself, that boat would be secure at least enough for you to hit the brakes. If
Actually,
something happened to your racks.
I do have a comment about the V-bar. So, and also a question, Leanne, in your estimation, then the rope around is enough. I wouldn't need a bow tie with a V-bar. Is that true?
It depends on how fast you like to drive and what are the
Yeah.
weather conditions you're driving in.
Mhm.
One thing I do want to point out about the V-bar, you see the notchy things where it's attaching to the actual crossbar on your car.
Mhm.
Be very careful the first time you put your boat on there. I don't have the same attachments, but the way that I had to put it on my Subaru, I had to screw from the bottom upwards. And the first thing I wanted to know was when I put my boat on, is the screw going to go through my boat? Because your boat really does go close to the bottom of that V. So just be careful
Mhm.
with whatever the attachment is, that it's not going to actually touch your boat. That I'm talking about where it screws onto the car.
And that's a great point. And again, to make sure that we're getting these racks, they're made to be used for any kind of boat. So you're going to have to customize it. And that's where, duct tape and some foam over top of things like that. And like even the screws in the bottom of the V, if you're starting at the back and sliding your boat up, well, if you hit those screws, like the top of those nuts, it's gonna hurt your boat. So when in doubt, again, pad it up. Duct tape and padding are great things, but make sure that you customize it for how you're actually going to load this rack to protect your boat as best you can. And there's a comment here in the chat from Jay. I assume it's Jay on Ray's account, that yes, you can transport multiple boats on top of a car with V-racks. If you're doing V-racks in a combination of just boats on there as well, you've got to make sure that the boats aren't going to hit each other. So anytime you're having multiple boats on top of a vehicle, I can fit at least three on mine comfortably, is that you want to make sure that no part of the boat, so usually the fattest part is the cockpit. You want to make sure that no part of the boat's touching another boat. That's the biggest thing. So if it is squished together, make sure that you've got some foam padding in there so that those boats aren't going to rub against each other. Another comment in the chat was Val, with the bow tie down, the picture that we had of the orange car where it was just to the one side. I always like to go to both sides. I've never actually done it just to one side. I don't know if Eric, if you have any comments on the wind from one side versus the other, if you're only going to one side.
I don't use one side. I tend to use like the one in this picture here, so that you've got two sides. Although I don't go under the vehicle, I use these things to go under the hood. Where is it now? These things.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just go into the front of the hood instead of going off to the side. That's what I do too. I go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, my boat extends past the front of my car, the hood of my car. So I have one line that goes straight down, and I secure it to the frame underneath the front bumper, and it's pretty well centered. But in the back, at the back of my car, the little hook on my rear bumper is off to one side. So my tie down on the back is off to one side angled. I've never really had a problem with it though.
I just want to point out, as we're talking about these bow tie downs, like on my car, where is it now? This one here, I can fit 3 boats on top of that without, with good separation and so on. And I use a bow tie down on the highway. And I would actually use one on this one too. I would use a bow tie down just because it removes stress from the roof rack. But I want to point out that you don't want to over tighten the bow tie down. It's not about tight. That's not the point of it. It's to relieve stress and provide an additional point of security. So it just needs to be taut, but not tight, if that makes sense. I don't know how to describe that. And the same would apply with the tail tie down as well. You just want some tension on it so it's not loose and flapping around, but you don't want to cinch it down. That's not the point of these tie downs at all. That's not, in fact, you might do harm if you do that. So you just want to, go ahead.
The purpose of it is to prevent the wind from coming and have an updraft underneath the hull and lifting the front of the bow as you're driving down the highway, right? So ultimately, that front tie down will only come into effect when the front hull is lifted, and then tension is created at that point, right? So when you're actually tying it down, you don't need to tension it. It just needs to be tight enough that it doesn't fall off. And actually one thing is that I've got, for my boat, I've got like a jersey fabric sock that goes over the entire length of the boat. And I found that in rainy, wet weather, that sock will stretch. And so I've had the rear tie down, the loop that I've got on the canoe, I've had that fall off. So I've found that it helps if you use a rubber around that as well to secure that tie down around the canoe with a rubber to keep it in place.
Or for those of you who are like me who have duct tape in your car, you can just use a bit of duct tape. But
yeah, you don't want duct tape on your cover though.
Oh yeah, I guess.
When in doubt, you do what you need to do.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
true.
Yeah. The reason that our audience may feel we've dwelt too long on putting cars on top of vehicles, but those of us who've traveled have seen countless boats, especially in Hawaii, I have to say, where they tie things down with shoestrings, but they tend not to pay attention like us Canadians to the same extent. But so many boats have blown off, and all of us have a story where a boat has blown off, and that's often the end of the boat. So this is really an important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, and when we're talking about highway speeds, we're talking about, driving at 100 kilometers an hour, 120 kilometers an hour. We're not talking about 50 or 80 kilometers an hour, sort of like city speeds. We're talking about highway speeds. So yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking like Highway 400 coming into Toronto with 8 lanes. And if we can save someone the feeling of that boat coming off the car and you see it in the rear view mirror flying and dragging across the 4 lanes of traffic on your side and going up against the middle separation, that's what we're trying to save you from.
Yeah.
Because as experienced as you think you may be, it's all it takes is one little oops, you get talking to someone and you forgot about something, and yeah.
Just on another oops kind of moment, one paddler at Falls Creek last year or this year didn't secure the end of his front tie down properly. I usually want to tie it up so there's no dangly ends of ropes. The end of his front tie down rope got caught up in his front wheel axle, and it ratcheted down his bow tie down and cracked his boat. So basically his boat ended up being like this, and he had to get a major repair done. It didn't sever it completely, but it went like that and just cracked the hull, right through the hull.
So
All right.
transporting boats, we have a great question in the chat
Okay.
about cover or no cover. And again,
yeah.
depends on where you're going, how far you're going. If I'm on a highway, I want a cover on it. But if I'm just going like 3K down the highway, I'm fine. I don't bother. But if it's going to be sitting on the car for any length of time, recommend a cover. If it is raining, that's another thing to consider, because if it's going to be raining and your boat's going to be sitting on your car with a wet cover, the wet cover on a boat can damage the paint.
Yes.
So you never want to leave your boat in a wet cover. You want to try and get it out of that cover as soon as you can.
And another thing is that, like, if you're driving on the highway, particularly maybe in winter or spring when there's still sand and grit on the road, don't follow closely behind other vehicles, because they'll be kicking up sand and kicking up rocks, all that kind of stuff. And all those things can cause pings on your boat finish, even through a cover, right? They can't, like, those things can cause a little hole in your boat, even through a cover.
Shall we move on to happier things? Okay. All right.
I think
Okay.
Kelvin's asking is where marine wax would come in handy. I don't think that would really help.
It won't help with stone chips, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or with the wet cover on the hull.
Right. Even actually, it's a good point. Storing wet boats, when you put wet boats away into covers, say in your boat storage, because we're now on storing your boat. I personally don't store my boat in a bag or the AMA in a bag, just because I've had bad experiences where the paint can bubble or blister if it's constantly in a wet environment, which sometimes a bag never has a chance to dry out, especially in the winter. But that's just my pet peeve. I certainly I tend to avoid covers unless I'm on a highway, like going on a longer trip. So Leanne, this is your area in terms of storing your boat, so I'm going to let you comment on this.
Well, a lot has to do with where you're storing your boat. Some people don't have a choice. It is at the club. And again, you want to look at the racking system that you're provided with if you're at the club, and if you're allowed to customize your rack a little bit if you have your spots. So like, I know I have my spots at Kelowna Paddle Center, and they've just got, you know, a wood little square that you put your boat in. So it's like, oh no, like I'm going to put some padding on there. I'm going to put some, I think it's like cupboard wrap or something around it, so it slides, the boat slides nicely on it instead of getting stuck on like the sticky part of tape around it. And so like, look at if you can customize your rack, and then looking at the shape of it. Like some people actually use the car foams with the curve already in them so that they can store them hull down, or they can go deck down. Again, I always like to put mine deck down when I know it's going to be sitting there for a while, because sometimes that pressure of just having those 2 points in storage can cause some pressure points on the boat as well, and some of those divots over time, especially if you're storing it there for months at a time and it's not being moved at all. I like to go deck down just so that hull, I'd rather have an indent in my deck than an indent in my hull, kind of thing. But padding, if you can do that to your club rack, definitely definitely do. If it is outdoors, so if it is not self-contained and closed in, highly recommend that you even just put a strap around your boat if it's in a little slot at a club, because the wind can come up. Again, looking at where the rack is relative to the water, relative to the water conditions. Is it going to get wet? Is there moisture that could get in it? That'll determine cover, no cover. That'll determine deck down, hull down, padding, all that kind of stuff. Whether you're tying down, 2 ends versus 1 end, if there's only 1 end exposed, like looking at those kind of things. And again, when in doubt, ask someone. The manager of the club, an experienced coach, an experienced paddler, ask them for advice on your rack. Look at what other people are doing with their racks, or ask them, those that store at home, ask them what they do for storage at home, because there's lots of different options at home if you have a space to do it, of what you can do. So if you want to advance the slide there, Eric, this is one option at home, is hanging on a wall. So an indoor wall, an exterior wall. This is my setup in my garage right now, where I've got hooks that are padded. I've got hooks for my seats, because again, I don't want to leave a wet seat on a boat. So even if I've chamoised the rest of the boat, I don't want to leave a wet seat on there, because again, it can damage the paint underneath it. And then that, especially if the cover's on it, then there's moisture inside that cover if it's all zipped up. So I like to separate my seats when I store them as well. Everything has the cover on it right now. If you went down to my basement at this very moment, they don't have covers on them because they're getting used daily, and our drive is 5 minutes to the water. So we're just popping them on the car, away we go. But anytime it's going to be out in the sun, then we want to make sure that you've got a cover on it. Dry your boat, put a cover on it. Outdoor storage, making sure that it is, if you're outdoors, again, thinking about the rain, thinking about the snow. I know a lot of people that store outdoors in their backyards kind of thing. In the winter, they will put a tarp around or over their boat to try and keep the rain, the snow, that kind of thing away from their boat. Highly recommend that. We don't want it just sitting out there getting covered in snow, melting, covered in snow, melting, covered in snow. You're taking your chances with that. So highly recommend wrapping it up in a tarp and checking on it regularly to make sure that there's not a lot of moisture in there, or other critters that have decided that that's a comfy place to live. And making sure that your plugs are open, especially in that freeze thaw cycle, because the worst thing that you can happen, and we've seen this with sixes, unfortunately, way too frequently, is there's water in the sixes and then it freezes and it can warp the hull. So any kind of frozen water inside any of our boats can damage them. So that's Hawaii, they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Here we do. So again, happy to chat or answer questions about winter storage. Luckily, I've got a garage space that I can fit in. We did a little bit of a reno so that it could fit, but that's not shown in the picture. We forgot to ask the strata. We just did it. Anyways. So yeah, when in doubt, ask somebody. Like, you've got your whole CORA board with our contacts listed on the Canadian Outrigger Racing Association website. You could always send a message to us on the board if you don't feel comfortable asking someone in your area, or if you don't have anyone in your area, which is the case for a lot of our new paddlers, is that we are here as a resource as CORA for you to help guide you on any of these things, give advice, that kind of stuff. So when in doubt, ask a coach, ask any one of us on the board, bring it up at any of these sessions, use the Facebook group to start a discussion on it, or their Facebook page, ask on there. But never feel like there's a stupid question, because if it's gonna save you $100,000, if it doesn't save you something, it might save somebody else from making a mistake that way too many of us have made over time or heard stories about others making. And we just want you to get the most out of your boat and your paddling experience.
Thanks, Leanne. I guess we'll open it up to questions now. We have people from all over Canada who experience different weather conditions. So storage during the winter, of course, is a big issue for most Canadians, most Canadian paddlers. Transport, I think we've gone into a lot of detail about transport, but I know, and people who've been around boats know, that it's a critical part of looking after your equipment.
It's
So,
usually the most expensive mistake if you screw
yeah.
that one up.
Yeah, yeah. And
Actually,
it's so easily preventable. So Ron, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, one thing we didn't touch on is how you transport your AMAs on the roof rack or inside your vehicle or whatnot. In my case, my AMA just barely fits inside my car from front windshield to back of trunk if I fold down the back seat. So I slip it in like this and it sits inside the car. And that way I can fit two hulls and maybe one AMA on the top roof of my car. But it's an old Volkswagen Jetta, and I wouldn't be able to fit two hulls plus two AMAs on the top of that unless I had extension bars on the roof rack. And I think
yeah, you're about to say it.
Yeah, some people do have extension bars on their roof rack, and you know, if those poke out that far, put tennis balls or something on the end so people don't poke their eyes out.
Yeah. And there's some V-bars that have an attachment on them for the AMA as well. Again, shopping for vehicles, I will take my AMA into the dealership.
Yeah.
And when they ask me what I'm asking for, I'm looking for wide racks, my AMA be able to fit inside, heated seats, and a sunroof so I can look at my tie downs if I am concerned.
Actually, that's a really good point, because with my car, I can see my tie downs. And it's like, I hear something and I look up through the sunroof and it's like, what's going on up there? Is that a strap flapping around or what's going on? So yeah, and then you know, if you're driving on the highway and you hear something funny, pull over at the next rest stop or the next little area where it's safe to pull over and check it all over. You know, don't assume that everything's okay.
Especially if you're driving through a crosswind.
I want to state the obvious here. By checking it over, it includes wiggling your boat. Go and wiggle your boat. Grab the tail of the boat and wiggle it. Go to the front and wiggle it there. It doesn't have to be Fort Knox. It doesn't have to be so tight there's no play at all, but it needs not to be loose. So you need to find, again, it's like this cheap tight kind of thing. You don't want to be so tight you're damaging the boat, but you want it to be snug so that it's there's not enough play there for it to get caught in the wind. Yeah,
especially if there's a crosswind. Like if you're driving on the Coquihalla Highway in BC's interior, there's some severe crosswinds at the higher elevations. And that can really torque the boat on the roof of your car. I remember way back, there were some, one manufacturer of boats, I think, had mini Iakus or something like that for transporting your boat.
Kooky.
Yeah.
Kooky had the little the little squared off ones where you could put them into the holes, the Iaku attachments, and then put the AMA on it so that the AMA was actually attached to the boat as you traveled. It was just small.
Yeah, a super short little Iaku. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, and Albatross had them too, Michael says.
Okay.
All right, questions. Bring it on, gang.
Hey, so I have a question. This is actually not about transport. It's, I just want to confirm something. Leanne, when you were saying about leveling the boat, like with the rigging, did I understand correctly that you're only adjusting the back Iaku and not the front one? Did I understand that?
You can adjust everything. The biggest one that's going to have an impact of like the leaning left versus leveling is going to be the back Iaku. That's where a lot of the weight sits. In terms of the front, what the front Iaku does a lot is kind of play with the level of the AMA. So how much, where's the water line on that AMA kind of thing. So often, especially with new paddlers, I just play with the back, and then the front is more of the fine tuning side of things. So I like to test it to similar to like for V1 where we're rubbering up our boats. There's so many rigging options. V1 has the infinite rigging options, whereas we get to OC1 and they start to get smaller based on the number of pins that you have. So with rigging, just because your friend that's 220 pounds rigs one way and you add $150, thinks, oh, well, Leanne rigs this way, she goes fast, I should rig that way. Weight has a lot to do with how you rig in your boat and what works for you. So me sitting in a boat with a rigging versus someone that's 150 pounds sitting in the same boat with the same rigging, that level, the bubble is going to be in a different place because of our body weights. So don't just go by what you hear or what you see someone else rigging. You go with it and you play with it. But ultimately, especially when the water's cold, do with what's comfortable. Now that we're summertime, the waters are warming up. If the water's, you know, not full of bacteria, like sometimes the Toronto waterfront is, or the Vancouver Falls Creek is, or the Humber River, then, you know, get out into some cleaner water and play with your rigging to see where it is comfortable, where those points are. And then you can play with that front of the AMA and see different water conditions, how it rides better for you. And that's a bit more advanced.
So
Okay.
that's left to right balance.
Yeah.
What about front bow to stern? Like when you adjust your seat for what's comfortable to you, you know, how much can you do to actually improve the center of balance for front to back? Is that?
Unless you have a Volare, you
Yeah.
don't have many options of center
Yeah.
from front to back because it is based on your leg length.
Yeah, okay. Because that's where I've got the ankle weight on my front bungees. That's like, you know, MacGyvering it, I guess, you know, but
And
yeah.
there's some people that are super small that have to be way up at the front of wherever the seat can attach to reach the foot pedals. And they have to put weights on the back of their boat so that the
Right.
rudder will be down in the water in waves.
That's right, okay.
So I had another question. Since nobody else is asking questions, I'll hog the floor. I noticed there's a question in the chat about repairing paint damage caused by having had a wet cover on the boat. And my question is also related to a wet cover on the boat. This year I have moved my boat, and for the first time it's outside during the summer, all summer. So I keep the cover on. This week it's going to rain every day in Montreal. That's not what you're talking about, but about a constant wet cover, because I feel, not knowing if it's going to hail or not, I feel a little safer keeping the cover on my boat when it's outside.
Or go grab a tarp and put it over top so that the tarp will take the wetness instead of the cover. Because you don't want that wet dry cycle happening on your boat.
So when it is going to dry out, let's say, for example, tomorrow it was going to be sunny, I should probably go take it off, dry out the cover, and if it's going to be a long rain period, cover with a tarp to keep wet off the actual cover of the boat. Is that kind of a strategy?
That would be my personal recommendation.
Okay.
Just
And
to
as far
address
as-
Loria's question, can
Yeah.
you repair paint damage caused by a wet cover? There's two issues here. It depends on what the issue is. So there's two issues that can happen. One is that it's just saturated with water and it bubbles or whatever. Like, it shouldn't actually do that, and modern paint methods should not. The boat should not be behaving that way. So
Should.
at least it should not. Yeah. So the first issue is, you may have a boat, if this happens to you, especially on a regular basis, where the paint did not bond correctly in the original construction, in the original development of production of the canoe. If that's the case, sometimes if it's an older boat, you're stuck with that. If it's a brand new boat, then it's a warranty issue and it needs to go back for warranty. But if it's a boat that's a year or two old, then you're stuck with it. And my recommendation, I've had this myself, is just don't keep the boat wet. Just, make sure it's dry all the time. Don't put it in a bag where it's going to be wet all the time. And then the problem will go away. If you try and repair it, once that initial bond in production is not there in the first place, repairing it is very difficult. They'll try and fix it. You're not guaranteed that it will be fixed if you take it to a third party. Leanne, go ahead.
This is where I'd be going back to the folks that we had on our repair and maintenance Zoom a few months ago and calling them for a recommendation to go, hey, what do I do, or what am I looking for in my area to find someone that can help me with this? Because this is beyond, it's beyond something that I would try and do myself.
Okay, this happened with my friend's boat, and she doesn't know what caused it, but she has, I'd say, like a waxy kind of, or a cloudy. The paint went cloudy, or it looks like waxy in areas. And she thought it might have happened in the water. But hearing you talk about a wet cover, I think there was a time in that time when we did have heavy rain coming off the water, I think. And I think she stores her boat in her cover in her garage. So it would have been a wet cover and then the boat stored for a few days in the garage. So I was just wondering if she's waxed it, like, you know, just a quick wipe over kind of wax it, and it looks good for a little bit and then it comes back to that.
Right. I want to go back to Leanne's comment about going to a paint expert like this. Yes, you can buff it out, but it sounds to me like this is not a serious issue. That's an issue where it's almost like leaving a wet cup on a piece of good furniture where it discolors, like a mug or something.
Exactly.
Table. It's that kind of thing. So to fix that, yes, you can buff it out, but you really should go to a proper repair person who can wet sand it. And you don't want to wet sand it yourself. Don't do that. So you want to take it to an expert to properly do it.
Yeah, and I have this on my Gemini. From a wet seat that was left on there at some point prior to my acquisition of the boat. And it's just like, all it is cosmetic. I'm going to be sitting on that anyway. It's not affecting the integrity of the hull. So it's just something I live with.
She realizes that, but you know, her boat's only 2 years old, and so
yeah,
you know, she wants it to be pretty.
It can actually,
it
can be fixed. It can be fixed.
Yeah.
It's not a serious issue. So, but I don't recommend, it's not something that you want to try yourself because you can make it worse. So take it to a paint specialist and they can fix it.
All right, great, thanks.
But urge your friend not to store a boat in a wet cover. Don't do that. Like it's not a recipe for success.
I will pass the information on, actually, and I'll recommend that you watch the recording of this.
All right.
Just in case you saying it a few times too, or maybe us saying it 10 times might hit home for people. See with the bow tie down.
And there was lots of other great information that I don't know how much she knows. Like, I don't know if she could do anything to improve how she uses her boat, but just I found, I don't own a boat, but I find all of this very good information.
Great. Awesome.
Well, Loria, that's a great segue. We have time for one more question, Ron, do we? Before we pass it over to you. So Michael from Toronto, road debris hit my car, bounced up and took a chunk off my Aries. Well, as an Aries owner, I sympathize with you. Chip off the paint, fixed with resin. Well, that's not a question. That's a good solution. I would do the same thing personally because it's my boat. That's totally fine if you're not worried about cosmetics. This is why I highly recommend white boats because you know, white boats they tend to be easier to fix if you're fixing yourself. But if you're really fussy and you want to do a perfect job, you should send it out to an expert. So I'm going to pass it over to Ron because we're at the end of our time.
Okay, thanks everybody. So this was the last CORA town hall until we'll take a hiatus for the summer. However, in 2 weeks, I think it is, Leanne will have an IVF World Sprints information session that people can tune into for information if they're looking to try out for the World Sprints Team Canada. Depending on the easing of restrictions in various areas of the country, You might see small boats and potentially OC6 racing starting up over the course of the summer. In British Columbia, False Creek Racing Canoe Club is planning on hosting the around Bowen race, which will be a small boats race only this year. And that's an 18 and 15 kilometer relay race around Bowen Island in Howe Sound. And then towards the end of August, I believe that the Comox Valley Racing Canoe Club is looking to host, I think what looks to be the first OC6 race of the year toward the end of August. I think it's August 29th, is it, Eric? Is that the date they came to?
Yeah, that's right. And there is an
28th,
OC6.
29th.
Yeah,
29th, yeah.
There's a 250 meter OC6 sprint race on August the 7th in Victoria as well.
Okay.
If you're really desperate to race 250, you can. And the boats are supplied, they're ultralights. So you'd be racing 250 in ultralights, which will make you go very fast.
30
so
seconds.
The race will be over very quickly.
Are there any turns in that 250?
No turns, straight.
Thank goodness.
Ultralights do not turn well.
No, they don't.
So,
No.
Michael or Val or anyone over in the East, are there any races, opportunities coming up yet out there? Like I know Sunnyside is doing some little things.
Unofficially, yes, we are. Sunnyside is doing some racing. We've actually had a 14K, and I think it was like a 12K relay or something like that, which I won. But anyway, I think it's no, it's been hard because we are trying to respect local restrictions.
Yeah.
But with all these new boats, everybody's like just going crazy. They want to race. So in terms of racing, Sunnyside is an opportunity. I know there's another relay, and all these are unofficial. There's no. We just try to provide a safety boat, just so it's a group of paddlers that happen to be lining up
On the water.
right
All right.
On the third, there's an unofficial, same thing, was supposed to be official and now is unofficial. But as far as I know, H2O is not canceling their events yet. They're doing a wait and see thing. So there is a H2O downwind in Montreal. Let's just call it what it is. Current. We're doing a current race, and and they're not canceling it yet because things are opening up. So it's kind of everything's wait and see.
Yeah, because you can it's easy to maintain distancing when you're on the water, right?
Yeah.
So, it's really a question of making sure that people don't assemble when they're on shore. That's about it.
Yeah,
And
we're doing a really good job of that. The organizers on our side, even where they set up is a different location. There's time penalties if you go unmasked during the relays, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have your mask on. You have to maintain. They even put a video of how you have to do the boat exchange if you are sharing a boat. So again, it is challenging, but I think it's safer than a lot of the other activities that are out there right now. Mm-hmm. So that's my personal opinion. And I think the OC6 will probably be, based on what I'm reading as of today, we'll be in stage 3 by August, which means that potentially OC6s could be on the water. So we've got our fingers crossed. I know there's a lot of, they've been sitting collecting dust for like 2 years, I guess, a year and a half.
Well, this is where you repair them and finish them.
Some of them were brand new.
Oh.
They haven't seen the water yet.
What I understand, in Montreal, we are currently allowed in an OC6.
Nice.
There hasn't been anything about racing OC6s, but I know H2O was out in their OC6 this weekend. And as soon as I get our OC6 from Toronto, I will be the first one. I don't care if I have to paddle that thing by myself. I've been trying to get this canoe since 2017. So we'll be paddling it as soon as we can get it down the 401.
So just to remind everybody, Alberta is wide open on Thursday.
Woohoo.
We have no No restrictions, save, we need to wear a mask in public, in Edmonton, we need to wear a mask in public transit and taxis. So
Cool.
I don't know what that means for OC racing, because we don't race at our club, but I know Leduc does races and Calgary has races, so I'm not sure where they are with those.
Well, thanks, gang, for letting us know what's going on. Totally self-serving me asking about Toronto because I fly out in 2 weeks, week and a half. So totally self-serving that way. But Ron, do we still have a virtual race going on right now?
I believe it's ending this weekend, or is it this weekend? I think, yeah, it's ending this weekend. So
it ends today. It ended today at 5 o'clock.
yeah.
Register. They can still log results until tomorrow at 5, but at the last race, the last logged race was today at 5.
All right.
And so with any luck, we'll be transitioning to actual in-person racing.
Awesome.
All right.
Any final words, Mr. Presidente?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, thanks everybody. We'll be resuming the series after the summer, probably September, maybe, you think? Well, probably in September, when things calm down a bit. It depends on how much of the pent-up demand takes in terms of everybody's time, because I think there might be a flurry of events people are planning for September to make up for past fundraising shortfalls and so forth over the course. And if that's the case, then you know, people will be generally pretty busy. So it might be September, October, I think. So.
Just
All
in
right.
time, the cold water paddling.
Huh?
All
Well,
right.
that's the fall is OC6 training season, so we'll get into OC6 then, I think. So yeah.
Perfect.
I
Thank
think
you,
that's a
guys.
wrap, you guys. We're
Thanks.
a few minutes over, so have a great 40-degree weekend for those of us on the Western Canada. For those of you east, I hope it's not quite 40 degrees. I hope you get a bit of a respite. But and for many of you, we'll see you in a couple of weeks at the sprints seminar that Leanne's putting on in terms of what to expect for London next year. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.